There we go. Alrighty, folks. Welcome. I'm sure to the people that are going to watch this in retrospect. It's the second time I'm streaming. I really liked doing it the first time. Only a few people showed up, but it was kind of fun anyway. Also, I found it motivating. Um, Even with only a few people watching, I feel like I did a better job. I took it more seriously, and I went a lot faster. Although I should have slowed down and talked more while I had an audience. But I'll do a bit more of that this time. If anything strikes me, or if I say anything wrong again. All right. I should probably get it recording. That was a funny thing I kept doing, was not actually recording what I was reading, just streaming it. All right. Might as well test this too. Tablets fashioned of black ash. Whatever. All right, let's see. Tablets fashioned of black ash. Whatever. Sounds pretty good to me. Normalize that. Tablets fashioned of black ash. Whatever. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Okay. Cool, cool. Here we go. The attendant reappeared, pale, eyes anxious unto rolling. A raggish shadow lurched beyond the threshold behind him, a movement that would have been limping were it not balanced leg for leg. At last, nope. At the last instant, Sheonan returned to watch the mighty Turturga's face. At the last instant, Sheonan returned to watch the mighty Turturga's face. He saw the famed eyes slacken, dull, even weary, in the manner of wise men grasping the inevitability of horrific futures. How many years of concerned watching, how many months of laborious counsel, fretting this very possibility. An odor of sweat and fish insinuated the chamber. They stood thus, motionless. Something fluid had entered the breathing silence of the room, a fluttering of mucus and membrane. Even though nothing was said, Sheo Narnra could see it plain in the hero mage's look. Sheo Narnra could see it plain in the hero mage's look. True. The dread rumors were true. The archdemu Mengaku turned to the newcomer, as much to conceal his smile as to bask in the glory of his foul image. For he had literally wept upon finding him and his brother, wept for joy, knowing that the two could decipher the horror of what they had seen. The creature stood naked, as was his wont, his wings folded into wicked hooks about either side of his great skull, which would have been cumbersome had it not been curved into a crest, narrow and deep, like an oyster set on end. A proportionate face hung from the fore, loutish with the absence of expression, nostrils drawn into shining gashes, sockets plugged with lobes of bare white meat. A second face filled the mouth, sheathing a second skull, fused within the crocodilian jaws of the greater. Second eyes regarded the hero mage with leering expectation. Second lips grinned about teeth like nails. Ooh, that's a good place to clip, actually. The light cast by the tripods slicked the creature in lines of luminous white, yellow, and crimson, but otherwise, the intestinal translucence of its skin rendered it devoid of color, the pallor of things drawn from the depths. Though he stood no more than half again as tall as a man, he seemed enormous for the wings, for the fiendish stoop, for the webbing of stone dense muscle. And Sheon Narnra could feel the tugging glamour, the promise of surrender within irresistible limbs. He could feel his own ardor rise, an answering will to be taken, ravished. Orang, a fabled Inkoroi, a creature out of legend and childhood terror. His lover. Mm. Stop and clip. You know, looking at me in the stark light now, I think I preferred the sort of scary darkness lighting. Uh, mm, here we go. He bears the stain as deeply as any Kuya. Sheonarnra heard Turturgus say from behind him. The Mengekan archdeme turned from his infatuation to face his hated foe. Is this why you await me thus? The hero mage said. He bent his head in a curious, almost Cooneroi way, as if some rage to kill bent him from within. Do you think that combined you could rival me? When I read that in the other video, I know this because I listened to it the other day. I said, "Did you think?" But that would be a funny mistake to make. I wonder if it's different in the. This is the print version, obviously. I read it the first time from the digital version. Maybe the text is somewhat different. Hmm. And Sheonarnra knew that this was no ploy, that Turturga would, without breath of hesitation, deliver his impossible fury to his tower. He had heard the tales. The whole ground had heard the tales. Turturga Mithlara, they called him, the giver of mercy. Ironic renown for his ruthless extermination of his foes. He was certainly the most powerful Insinger ever born. And if what Ketangira said was true, the most powerful period. No living Kuya had the purity of his recitations. Even his stain was different, somehow muted, as if he could cut the inward without scarring it. Even now, simply regarding him, his distinction literally glared from his image, a strange sideways rinsing of the stain. Hmm. Yeah, I wonder a bit what's going on with Turturga and his bizarre sorcerer's mark. And earlier in the story, Sheonan was like his famed grace, or perhaps he says that later. Um, it seems like Turturga is God entangled in the way that Sorwheel and Isserol were. And maybe this is just what a God entangled mage is like, since neither one of them were part of the few. Maybe if you're God entangled and part of the few, you get a weird looking stain, or maybe you're not damned because you're destined to go to the outside domain of whatever patron god has possessed you. Hmm. Moving on. The difference. I'm sorry. The vital difference. The threat. They said he had been blind as a child, that no Rao himself had found him begging in the streets. They said he went mad while canting. They said his words seized things that should not be seized. Sheo Narnra gestured to the attendant to dispense the sere. The fool almost fumbled the vessels for terror. Alrighty. So I'd say that line with a smile. The fool almost fumbled the vessels for terror, because I really like the way that in this story especially, R. Scott Baker weaves Sheo Narnra's personality into the narration. Like the narrator and Sheo Narnra are separate, but uh, his bias or his feelings are dripping into the narration, and like how Sheo Narnra is maybe thinking that the attendant is a fool and maybe laughing at him. In the same way, there's like a laugh line when Turturga looks at Orang's dick in a second. Um, but Sheo Narnra doesn't find that funny. Back to it. Rival you, he replied under cover of his trivial distraction. This trivial distraction. Rival you, he replied under cover of this trivial distraction. The ground is at peace. The Skinty are pacified. The All-King watches from Umarau. He turned with his brawn vessel. He turned with a bronze. He turned with a bronze vessel that Turturga waved away. Orang is my guest, he said, sipping the burning liquor. The hero mage did not shout or rave. He did not need to. So grating was the resolve of his voice. It is Inkoroi! He spat the name with its clipped, non-man inflection, the hatred of his teachers cracking his voice. Inkoroi. For the first time, he let slip his Umeri face, the one that would claim all judgment for itself. Such was the gulf that divided the field from the Werg, and beseeched his rival archdeme. Sheo Narnra, think! Think. No word was so raw with ancient assumption. The Archdemu Mengaku simply regarded his Sohonk counterpart the way one might regard a fool brother who has yet again spoken foolishly. Something scarcely perceptible hardened the man's stance and manner. I will not implore you a second time, old friend. Try that again. I will not implore you a second time, old friend. Finally, a genuine threat. Sheo Narnra pursed his lips against the tickle of his thin mustache, sighed as if in profound resignation. He glanced at the black coin of Sere swinging in the bottom of his appropriated cup, downed it with a gasp. How could the man know? Even with his rumored grace, there was no going back, no undoing what had been done, no unseeing. Sheo Narnra had committed unspeakable, nay, unthinkable acts. They all had. Debaucheries, desecrations of self and others, shrieks for cries of passion, blood for grease. Mere recollection set his skin afire, such was the orgiastic ecstasy. He had exalted in the trackless void, the whole where good and evil had once been. And he had resolved most of all, for he had seen. Hmm. He watches. Nope. He watches the true sun rise above the horizon's crown, low and bloody as sunset, throwing shadows outward along the lines the non-men could describe in throwing shadows outward along lines the non-men could describe in arithmetic. He could sense Ketengira's desperation, so he prolongs the reverie, pretending to wonder at the fragments of darkness scoring the broken landscape below. Then he turns to the barricades, examines its fractal complexities. He begins he begins to sing. His voice slips the point of vocalization, drops outward in every direction, until all of creation sings with him. Between his hands, a needle of raw incandescence twists into existence, shines with a brilliance undimmed by the glare of dawn. Sheonon returns to the great non-Mankuya. Do you see, old friend? Ketangira stands gazing, parsed by the sun into silken light and dolphin shadow. A vulture rides a great arc in the blue emptiness behind him, ragged and black. More and more, the scavengers have taken to circling the horns. The barricades, he continues, they fold, intervals. Somehow, Emilitis found a way to pinch emptiness into angles. This was why no dispensation of sheer force could batter them down. In a sense, everything you and my predecessors threw at it simply missed. In a sense, everything you and my predecessors threw at it simply missed. The black eyes pierce him. And what is this? Okay. A Mathesis pin, a derivative of an ancient Enteleshi theorem. A derivative of the ancient Enteleshi theorem, which was forced down to an arithmetical point. An arithmetical. It whittles force down to an arithmetical point. You see, this wasn't in my other one, so I don't have anything ready for how I want to say this because I skipped over this before. A Mathesis pin, a derivative of the ancient Enteleshi theorem. Arithmetical point. All right, let's go. A Mathesis pin, a derivative of an ancient Enteleshi theorem. It whittles force down to an arithmetical. Arithmetical. Is that a word? It's not a word I'm familiar with. It whittles force down to an arithmetical point, pricks where all else bludgeons. Wonder dawns in the ancient gaze. A force that does not occupy space cannot be redirected in space. Yes, Sheonarnra says, my gift to you. All right, that's pretty interesting. So the barricades are like a giant reflecting magic shield. So if you try to shoot it with a big cannon, that won't work because it'll put it to a different space. But hold on here, the Enteleshi theorem, the Mathesis pin allows you to like poke in between the spaces of the barricade or whatever. It's too tiny to be slipped away, to be pushed away. Anyway, it's magic, baby. Maybe you could use an auto tune for the non-man voices. That's a smart idea. Maybe like pitch them low down. Yeah. I mean, it's worth looking into. I try not to for like these straight up reads to mess with the audio too much, or to do effects on them, but I could. Look forward to Prologue 2. I've been working on it forever. There's a lot of interesting audio stuff that I'm doing in there. Um, I have not yet because Gira is in that story too. Spoilers if you haven't read that. Sorry. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I should do something interesting with his voice. My friend Adam's gonna voice uh, the mysterious non-man in prologue 2 that we know nothing about. All right, starting up again. Nice to have you here, Victor. He could feel it all the time, what he had seen. Feel it like worms in his bones, rotting him, making him less substantial than what he was. A tingling fog, a meaty flex. Horror now thumbed the edges of his every sensation. The image of his damnation. Ah, dry mouth. He could feel it all the time, what he had seen. Feel it like worms in his bones, rotting him, making him less substantial than what he was. A tingling fog, a meaty flex. Horror now thumbed the edges of his every sensation. The image of his damnation. Who are you to condemn? Sheo Narnra cried, in the mock way of two learned men. The schools have no stake in non-man wars. This much was true. The Siku were loath to speak of the war. Even Ketangira, who had led the Mengeka to the Ark and the revelation of the Zir Kirimakra. Their feud with the Inkoroi was theirs, and theirs alone. So much so that they denied their mannish pupils all but the most elliptical knowledge of it. Hmm, put that there. Hmm. Hmm. Sorry, I'm just reading over the page, thinking about how I read it before, and if I remember how I read it, and if I remember how, if I liked how I read it. It's my process. But Turturga frowned, as if at some tiresome juvenile. Who are you to decide our stake? Sheo Narnra stood blinking, cursing. How? He cried, holding out an arm to the hoary majesty of Orang. How can you fools not see how small this makes us? Plainly, Turturga replied, frowning at the creature's groin. Fool! The stakes of everything have been rewritten. Everything! At long last, fury clenched Turturga's brow. What was sane before we knew of the Ark remains sane now! Sheonanra! This thing is obscene! Why could they not see? They were every bit as damned as he. Damned! What overriding reason could there be? What possible logic could annul eternity? I'll put that there. Yeah, I'm realizing again, just like on the fly mistakes I made the first time I read this. Uh, Over here, the expression two learned men, TOO dash learned, I read that as if it was like two learned men the first time. That was a goof. Uh, yeah. Ooh, starting up again. The sky, Turturga. Think! The sky is an endless void. Each star is another sun, like our own. The grounds spin about them. Whole grounds hanging in the moat. Nope. Whole grounds hanging like moats in the great void. He was not simply offering them salvation, he was showing them sanity. Other grounds, Turturga cried with a derisive bark. And why not? When the ground was by definition the very basis of everything. It was just as Orax had said, truth becomes ignorance when men make gods of deceit. Flip that. Keep going. I know how this sounds, Sheo Narnra said. But what of the Ark? The Inkoroi? They prove the existence of other grounds, do they not? Grounds like our own. No. The glistening Inkoroi rasped, speaking an archaic intonation of Hirimsu, his, inno- his inhuman voice falling like a flake of ice upon sweaty skin. He had stepped into Sheonarnra's blind flank and now loomed over him, his frame a sleek motley, like fish skinned and sutured together. Not like your own. The hero mage fairly gaped at the creature. It speaks to me. This ground, Orang continued, oblivious to his transgression. Orang continued, oblivious to his transgression. This ground is the one promised. Salvation lies within your grasp. Salvation in this life. Insolence. Other voices must commend yours before you speak, Sheonarnra said to the creature, trusting the savagery of his backward glance to serve as a warning. But Orang continued his shining scrutiny of Turturga, a transgression that Sheonarnra found unnerving. Do you not fear damnation? A careful look from the hero mage. The non-men, he said evenly. They have taught us how to hide our voices. They have taught us how to hide our voices, how to bypass the outside, find oblivion. Eyes like. Maybe I'll take a second. Yeah, Turturga's voice. I think it's fun, but it hurts to do. Yeah, I wonder about this. What he says here about the non-men having strategies to not go to hell. To me, and to a lot of people that I talk to online about this, it sounds like misconception and cope. The non-men think if they go underground, they can get away from heaven, right? Like that's a caveman's misconception of how that might work, or other silly stuff like that. Uh, the Inrithi seem to think that like killing a bird has some relationship to the outside and to the gods as well. Um, there's some bizarre misconception or overgeneralization of like the sky and the outside and heaven, and they're mixing them all up together. And I don't know, you get these wacky ideas like, oh, if I commit sins underground, then I can't. No, none of the gods will see me, and I can't go to hell. Sorry, closing Windows. There we go. Eyes like bladders of ink, each reflecting the tripods across their shining curve, the fluting of gill tissues along the neck. You worship the spaces between the gods. Yes. A rasp like the screams of faraway children tangled in the wind. Inkoroi laughter. You are already damned. All of you are already damned. So say you. Ha! Good one, Turturga. You told him. A deep-chested rumble, popping mucus. So says the inverse fire. A flush of horror. Sheonarnra tensed against the sudden loosening in his bowel, not quite believing that the Incore had dared name it aloud. Zur Kirimakra, the inverse fire. For a heartbeat, he found his voice divided between mere fear and what mattered. What? Did Orang seek to seduce the Sohonk Archdeme? For a heartbeat, he found his voice divided between mere fear and what mattered. What? Did Orang seek to seduce the Sohonk Archdeme? Did Orang seek to seduce the Sohonk Archdeme? Could he not see that Turturga was not one to suffer rivals? That Sheon Narnra himself would be doomed were he to embrace their holy consort? But these were vain questions. They fell away as quickly as Onkis offered them up. So flimsy were the concerns that moved them. All that mattered, the ground's only consequential thing, was what he had seen. Damnation. Experience shredded into 1,000 strings, each clawed and burned, sucked like bottomless bones. Agony, anguish, horror, lament, shame. Shrieking, thrashing, screaming through the throat of his every memory. Innumerable and one, groaning, choking, vomiting his every particle a unique agony, a bereavement, a weeping, howling, scratching out eyes that grew and grew to witness anew, while burning, blistering, breaking. It defeated the tongue, the intellect, what he had seen. Nevertheless, it was in him, every moment in him, if not at the center of his care, then beneath, a hole that endlessly gnawed at his gut. A terror so profound, so abiding, and yes, pure, that all other fears guttered into nothingness for lack of air. A terror that was a gift. Such was the peace and certainty that followed upon it. Hmm. Yeah, it's the gods can't see through rock. The gods can't see through rock. They can't see in the dark, right? Uh, the non-men again. There's that non-men poem I think in the Unholy Console where it's just like I did a good thing in the light. I did a bad thing in the dark. I did a good thing in the light. I did a bad thing in the dark. I'm going to heaven for sure. It's like I don't know. I'm pretty sure if you're omniscient, you can see things that happen in the dark. Or if you can't, then that's a pretty lame god. But the gods of the outside might maybe they are lame. It's going to come up later in this story uh, that apparently if one of their avatars has the unerring grace the way Sorwheel did or the way that Isserol did, you can still kill them with a Burmese tiger trap. For some reason, that still works. Am I still recording? Yes. All right. They had conjectured, the Mengeka. They had experimented. They had taken captives and inflicted every possible agony simultaneously, all in the name of some flimsy purchase, some scant knowledge of hell. Drawing toenails, while crushing genitals, while setting a fire, while murdering children, raping wives, strangling mothers, blinding fathers. They had visited lunatic misery on innocence, and they had found themselves utterly impervious, immune to the least remorse. Some of them had even laughed. What was earthly anguish compared to what awaited them? Singular, ephemeral, little more than a bauble laid upon the monumental steps of the wretchedness to come. They were deluded fools, the schoolmen of the Sohonk. Every one of them lived making believe. Even more, making witless and numb when it came to their voices. It was sorcery they coveted, the lure of power, such potency. The voice had a way of walling off the future when power was at hand. Hmm. It's not a sin if it's the name of science. Yeah, I mean, tell that to the lab rats. They probably would not agree with that. And well, and again, the human lab rats that are like being shuffled towards the carapace, right? Like, sorry, but we're doing this so nobody has to go to hell anymore. I hope you appreciate it. Uh, I'm also again just noticing because I'm now overly familiar with my first read of it, too much so maybe. Uh, the lure of power with Lure. I again reading too quickly had first said the lore of power, but I thought that's what it said now for the longest time, and I liked that line, the lore of power, because like they're singing, right? They're singing a song. It's like like a bard, but no, it's the lure of power. That's all right. That means that the lore of power is still available. You can use that in your story, guys. It's up there. All right, this is like one of the best parts. All men wailed. All men burned. All the time. They need only die to realize it. So that is the source of your madness, Terturgus said. The inverse fire. Sheol Narnra closed his eyes against a shudder. So you know of it, he said on a long intake of breath. Nugikis told me. Yes. He told you of the three? The three who entered the golden court of Sil during the scourging of the Ark? Upon the upright horn. Yes. So you know what happened? A draught whisked through the chamber, the kind that washes over a floor of cloistered air in a flood. The golden infant skull, braided into the hero mage's beard, seemed to laugh for the to and fro sway of the fires potted upon the bronze tripods. It struck Sheo Narnra that Turturga had stood absolutely motionless ever since setting foot in the Asina. He seemed hewn of heavy oak as it was, but standing as he did, glaring from man to Incoroi to man again, he seemed almost a thing of stone, indestructible. Okay, just to mention again, he's apparently standing so still that Sheo Narnra like remarks on it. That it's weird that he's standing so still. Kind of like when Kelmomus is staring at Isserol and thinking the exact same thing. It's weird this guy never moves. So yeah, maybe I think Turturga's going the same way. But here in this story, we have a dude with the unerring grace, maybe, being defeated without a certain special person in the room, right? And so how did they dance around the unerring grace this time? Is there a way to beat it without without a blonde kid in the room, possibly? Yeah, I gotta stop with that shit. Spoilers, guys. I'm reading The False Sun, which is at the end of this book. Okay, so if you're listening to this and you haven't read all the books, then that's on you. It's not on me. Letting him see his aura in full. Yeah, I wonder about this. Minoroicus had fallen, the hero mage replied. The Ishroi labored in vain to destroy the Ark, as did the Kuya. They knew of the Golden Court, of the inverse. From Ninjanjan, Sheon Arnra found himself interrupting. Why? Why did they insist on repeating its name? A thing need not be named to be spoken of. Yes, from Ninjanjan, Toturga repeated, something not quite identifiable sparking in his eyes. And because they knew, Nokikis chose the three to enter it. Two Ishroi, renowned for their valor, Misaricus and Runaidil, and one Kuya. He paused, as though to set his teeth against his hatred. He paused, as though to set his teeth against his hatred. Ketin Gira. Sheo Narnra. Sheo Narnra found himself turning to the Inkoroi, cackling, crying. He knows! In a voice too maniacal to be his own. He knows! I know only what Nilgigis told me, that Misaricus and Runidal returned shrieking. Yes, Sheo Narnra had also shrieked, for a time, and wept. And that Kettengira counseled his king to have them killed. A barking laugh. And did he tell you why? A moment of fierce scrutiny. Because they could not be trusted, because they had been ensorcelled, possessed. No! Sheo Narnra heard himself cry. No! Could this be him, wagging his head like a fly mad in docks, gesticulating like an old hag at a funeral? Because they had seen the truth! Turturga gazed with undisguised distaste. Such is the form of all possession. You know as much. No! Sheo Narnra cried. Nilgigis lied to you. What else could he do? Think. Think of the war they had just won. Think of the toll. The non-men had sacrificed everything. Their wives, their daughters, to triumph over the Inkoroi. And now they discover that all along the truth belonged to their foe. And now they discover all along the truth belonged to their foe. The Archdemu Mengaku began berating himself even before he finished. Such was the unmanly violence of his expression. He had to recollect himself. Recall! He had to own what happened here, not for the sake of men, for none would ever know, but for the sake of his immortal voice. All right, I think that's all I've got for today. Dry mouth is hidden heart. But thanks for coming by, Victor. And thank you, anybody who watched this. And look forward to me piecing this together and putting it all together for a reread of The False Sun. At which point I will probably take down my original. Not take it down, but maybe just delist it so you can still find it on my subreddit. But, not my subreddit, but my Reddit account. I just want to check something really quick. I have here with me the digital version of The False Sun. I'm going to pull it up here. I really just want to see, like, did I mess up so many of these really easy lines, or is the print version different from the digital version? I'm sure it's not, and I'm just going to end up seeming really dumb. But, like, for example, is this why you await me thus? Do you think that combined you could rival me? I read did you think? Did you think? And I think that just based on the flow of that sentence, did you think makes more sense. But maybe I'm wrong. Let's see. I've got it right here. Yeah, and feel free to tune out here, people. This is I'm gonna solve an argument with myself over here. I'm not going to bother looking up failing star. I've made my peace with that one. Right. No, do you think? No, yeah, that's just me messing stuff up over and over again. Alrighty, good to know. I wonder what I'll discover that I've messed up upon listening to this one. Anyway, folks, I'll probably keep recording The False Sun next weekend. So, Victor, I'll see you on Friday. Anybody else who can make it? Friday, 11 o'clock, not midnight. Midnight's too late. I was really tired. Anyway, see you, folks. Bye-bye.